All right. Hello. Welcome to Bloom After Baby, the podcast. This is Jen here today, and I'm so excited about today's episode. We have Zach Watson joining us, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Zach is the creator of the wildly popular social media account Real Zach ThinkShare, where he talks about things like invisible labor and the mental and emotional load, decision fatigue, and equitable parenting. And he shares examples and anecdotes that help make these concepts totally relatable. But before we go any further, I know that these are likely new terms to many. So, what is the mental load, emotional load, invisible labor? All of these terms are describing the unnoticed and uncompensated work that goes on behind the scenes to keep our households and families running. It's the direct childcare, it's household chores, it's preparing meals, managing schedules and appointments, researching parenting information, maintaining social relationships, planning gatherings. It's all of the mental lists and to dos and thoughts and worries. And one of the most challenging things about the invisible load is that it is often rooted in our subconscious biases or expectations on gender norms that we might not recognize until they manifest in the domestic labor in our households, particularly after baby. And this was actually the case for Zach. After becoming a father, Zach began recognizing the discrepancy around domestic duties and parenting that were showing up in his own relationship. And through his own revelations and reading the book Fair Play by Rodsky, Zach began identifying the underlying toxic myths and societal messages that have conditioned us to accept this unequal division of labor. He's now a fair play facilitator and is a leading expert and educator on this topic. So, as I'm talking about all of this, one thought that might come to mind and a critique that Zach has admittedly received is, should Zach, as a male, be an expert on offering solutions to a problem that is predominantly a hardship for women or moms? Is he, as a male, the right person to be sharing the message? And we get into that today during our conversation and why, in my opinion, it's a good thing. It's the action we need from the male half to close the gender gap, that women and moms shouldn't have to be solely the ones responsible for fixing what's broken. Today, we dive deeper into the invisible labor and mental and emotional load as it relates to mental health and how certain tasks that often default to moms, like direct childcare, managing family schedules, organizing the home, for example, can add up to um, overwhelm, and how certain tasks like childcare carry more emotional toll, and how all of that relates to mental health. And we unpack the different standards for men and women and why the invisible load often falls to moms, plus some of the pressures and norms that dads face. Uh, and don't worry, we will definitely also get into solutions, what you can start doing right now to find more balance in your relationship, and some of the awesome resources that Zach offers for support. So, with that, let's jump in. All right. So, welcome, Zach. We're so thrilled to have a chance to connect with you today. Like I was telling you, we reference you, both Rachel and I, in our professional careers working with patients and with clients. And we both also have turned to you in our own parenthood journeys and navigating our own relationships. So, we totally see you as kind of an expert in this field that we're going to talk about today. And so honored to have you on. I think if it's okay with you, I'd love to start with a little bit of a background on your journey, both how you had this career transition to where you are right now, but also sort of the emotional, mental revelation that you had that brought you to focusing on this work.
Sure. I was an engineer in college, became a software developer. I followed Facebook's CFO, Sheryl Sandberg. She talks about
Uh,
the career jungle gym instead of a career ladder. So went over to become a teacher, worked in special ed, math, and STEM, and then video editing for a year with a lot of students. 8 years of that, and then our child was born 2.5 years ago, and I said, well, I don't know how our home is going to function without me being home a significantly more amount of time. Like being away for 50 hours a week doesn't, I don't know how we're going to do that. So I went into sales in like a remote work situation. And then after about 2 years of that and, growing my social media following, pretty much the whole time. I found that I had enough of a leeway and I had enough proof of concept and that I felt like I was one, able to help people, and two, they're willing to pay me enough that back in January I made the leap to going coaching and content creation full time, trying
Mhm.
to help solve as much as it's a couples issue. I think, the moms out there feel the heavier weight of it, of educating people on invisible labor.
Yeah, and I think with mothers, particularly postpartum period, a lot of their issues around mental health have to do with things related to the invisible mental load and the emotional load, and domestic division of labor. And so, um, where at what point in your kind of journey, I know you'd read the Eve Rodsky book, Fair Play, you're a
Mhm.
facilitator, a certified facilitator, but where was the journey, your personal journey that you realized, hey, this information isn't really getting to the people that need it? Because again, we are actually diverting patients to you saying, this isn't something I've been trained on in my medical training, but these are serious areas that have to do with mental health. This guy is talking about it and he has some great tips. So, where did you realize that like no one else is talking about this? This is how I can reach people.
Um, well, so I had been making content for years, starting like 2016, and in September 2021, when I was on maternity leave for the first of the 3 months that I
Mhm.
was on, I started talking about just what it was like being a dad. I made this video. One was the sixth S that no one talks about, which was smell, of calming a child, and that was my first video that I think did like 900,000 on TikTok. And then I made a second, uh, I made another video like a week later talking about, um, I was really grateful for the sacrifice that a lot of moms were making around breastfeeding. And Alyssa was putting in a significant sacrifice on herself. I think she was definitely influenced by the Breast is Best people and felt a lot of
Mm,
shame around her experience with breastfeeding because, it was not easy for her. And we ended up documenting a bit of that experience. But,
mhm,
a couple of those posts, like people are like, wow, this guy's doing things differently. And I didn't know I was doing things that differently. I knew taking 3 months of paternity leave was different. I didn't know it was unheard of. I knew that, acknowledging moms for the sacrifices they're making was like probably an underspoken message. I didn't know how much of a desert women were in for acknowledgement of that. Um,
mm,
so I think a lot of my early content was just talking about being a dad. I realized at some point that, I'm kind of ashamed to share this. I'm growing more towards guilt in it, but I think, I kind of use my newborn as clickbait. I didn't know I was doing it until I had one video that I didn't have for it, because so a part of our odd circumstance was that our kid wouldn't sleep outside of our arms, wouldn't sleep in a crib. So I had my shift from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. I would sit in the rocking chair and she would nap in my arms, and or my goal was to soothe her before 10 minutes were up and I had to go wake up my wife. Was like the standard of care, as I would say with my clients. That's the agreement we came to with Alyssa. And I was saying, like, the hard part for me is not listening to our baby cry. It's knowing that Alyssa has said that I had better damn wake her up if I was not able to soothe her for 10 minutes because she was probably hungry. So
mhm.
as I was making those videos, I think, our kid was not in one of them, and the views went down. I was like, oh no, what have I been doing? And it was like, so at some point, I was sort of a feminist man talking about stuff, and then Roe v. Wade overturned, and I kind of surrendered my platform to other moms. I didn't feel it was appropriate to speak. It just wasn't my voice didn't need to be heard in that time. And then I read Fair Play after making a post, what book should I read next? And Laura Danger and my friend Abby Eckel had said, you should read Fair Play. I was like, okay, I trust them. They had talked about me in various other videos. So it was really cool hearing they had the same recommendation. After reading that, I realized how much I was missing from Alyssa's experience. Like, I knew she, in a lot of ways, was kind of drowning, in being touched out, being feeling like she was the main thinker and owner of, childcare. And I knew some of that was biological, and I knew some of it was like culture pushing shame on her for, not doing everything.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't realize the heaviness of mental load. I didn't realize, like, I remember for my birthday, we went down for a triathlon in New Jersey, and it because it was my birthday weekend, it was somewhat assumed that Alyssa would sort of think about all the things that need to happen for our child to get down there. And there were moments when I would try to take things off her plate, but I'd be like, there were moments prior to it where I'd be reprimanded or something by her, which was like, hey, you forgot this. Like, and there's a lot of like her being frustrated with me, and I would retreat to
Mhm.
this point of like, okay, like, hey, I'll do all the things, but like I need you to make the list for me because I'm not trying to get yelled at for trying to jump in and do stuff and then doing it wrong. So I just started sharing kind of real life examples of where I saw myself adding mental load to her and or where I could be slowly taking them off, like one tiny little thing at a time. My first video that I made about that in December 22 was of our kid was sick. She's about a year and a quarter old. And I said from the other room as we're getting ready for nap time, hey, should I do water or milk? And I said, I just called myself out, said, hey, this is part infinity of me adding mental load to my wife. I asked her milk or water, and I could have easily came to her and said, I think we should do water because of X, Y, and Z reason. Here's the water. Does that work for you? Or do you want
Mhm.
milk? Versus saying, having the buck stop with her. And I think when that video, I mean, it's like 6 million or something on TikTok, I was like, what? Like, I knew I was saying something relevant, but I didn't think it was that relevant. Um, and just like the way that people responded to that, like, oh my God, yes, like how there's so many comments of like, why am I crying right now? And I realized after over time, after I was like, okay, well, that was a great video. I should make more of those. After seeing, a couple dozen of those, realizing like, wow, there's so many women that feel one heard by it, but two didn't have words for or like a way to point to the frustration that they were feeling.
Mhm.
And so I think mental load is that labeling word, kind of like we talked about, like if you can speak about the shame that you're dealing with, like it'll start to dissipate. Similarly, I
Mhm.
think if you can start pointing to the mental load that you're experiencing, it's much easier for a partner to take it over. And I think it's much easier for you to not sit in misery about it because you can point to it because you
Mhm.
like can't point to it. It's just so hard to deal with. I know I kind of rambled on there. Does that kind of answer your question?
Oh, completely. I mean, first of all, definitely answers the question as far as kind of recognizing this was such a gap in sort of this relationship dysfunction and that you received all of this crazy feedback, identifying that this was for sure something people wanted to hear more of. Totally makes sense. And then I think your point about um, that you aren't necessarily, it's not necessarily guidance for moms, but I guess yeah, kind of thinking about, I know you've received some like criticisms or critiques about you being this voice for this problem that is a really significant um, female problem or mom problem, and you being the voice of sort of what the solution is. But I think as I'm listening to you talk about it, really realizing like how that is such a gift because when we're dealing with these issues of emotional load, um, mental load, and also being responsible for being the one to reconcile it, communicate it to our partner. This is what we need to do to fix it. Doing the research, reading Fair Play, like you're taking that ownership. And so I think, yeah, as you're talking about it, I'm realizing how proactive that is that you're asking men to speak up and do this, be
Hmm.
the solution.
Yeah, it's been hard getting other guys to do it along with me. I even had like, I've talked with the other fair play facilitators. I mean, there's 117 of us. There's only four guys. And even
Really?
and the one of them I think if I'd recommended him or he'd recommended me, but Michael Von World Shaker, he does a good job speaking out this, but I mean, even John and, John, you can see his face, I can't think of his name, but the other guy, like I said, yeah, like, hey, I'm happy to share my platform with you if you sharing moments about where you're adding mental load for your partners. And I think, as much as I was on the Mom Well podcast and she kind of called me out for, hey, you're this guy voice in a female problem, and like she has Harvard law degrees, you have TikTok. Like what do you have to say for yourself almost kind of? And there's a lot of moments where I'm like, am I just a guy talking about women's issues and it's refreshing because it's coming from a guy, or am I actually good about what I'm talking about? And it's a confidence battle I deal with daily. But I think one of the things that I do well, which I decided about a year ago when I decided I wanted to take TikTok seriously and have a business come from it, was I recognize I don't want to serve women in terms of I don't have anything to teach them. I may have a 93% woman audience, but um, I'm here to validate their experience in a lot of ways, more so than teach them anything. What I want to teach is guys, and so I softened my approach to explaining it. I've made, yeah, I think a lot of what I make is skits, as well as just personal experiences. And in those skits, I know sometimes I can be kind of harsh on other guys, and yeah, I know I'm pulling the strings a little bit to have it maybe try to be a little bit more viral and like hit the heartstrings a little harder, for exposure. But I think I also try to make a lot of videos where I'm throwing myself under the bus first. I
Mm-hmm.
call myself a recovering man child. One, because I know it's a great clickbait title because it sounds fun, but at the same time, I think, a lot of people that talk about being in recovery, like folks that are dealing with alcoholism, they acknowledge like, yeah, I'm one drink away from being back to where I was and heading down that rabbit hole. And I
Hmm.
almost think similarly, like there are moments in my day when I'm like, wow, I could go full man child here and just ask for a list. I could pretend I didn't see the cat puke on the floor and not pick it up. I could pretend that I'm not seeing this small mess and let Alyssa pick it up. And there's so many of those moments throughout my day where I'm like, I could totally revert back to man child. And so I feel
Hmm.
like I'm a recovering man child in a lot of ways. So, I try to call myself out first. And I think when guys are able to see another guy throwing the rock at themselves first, it's a lot
Hmm.
easier for them to tune in and point the finger and like, ah, yeah, that guy sucks. Wait a second, that sounds exactly like me. Damn it. Like that's the experience that I think I'm really going for with a lot of those videos is like, I want guys to hear themselves in it, and you got to soften the blow by hitting yourself first and throwing yourself under the bus.
Yeah, and I think that you are identifying things that I think a lot of women don't recognize as actually being their struggle. I mean, like you pointed out with some of the emotional or mental load, not realizing is actually creating the mental toll that it is. One thing that really stands out to us in postpartum is that a lot of the emotional and psychological load is stuff that's like brand new to you. I mean, thinking about breastfeeding, nursing, or feeding and keeping track of the schedule, how much baby ate, if they're eating enough, weight, like all those things that are brand new. And so you're not even recognizing some of the emotional toll it's playing. I think you're so tuned in more. I would say you're more tuned in than maybe the average person to some of the emotional, like psychological side of what the mental load can look like. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners. I think with you talked about in Alyssa's pregnancy how you'd been sober. I think you said you wore a weighted vest at some point, even.
I did.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more kind of maybe even how you had that mindset, and then also, like, what other things popped up for you in pregnancy and postpartum that were kinda unique to the mental, emotional load?
So I'll start off with this was that I've been asked, my mom always would, I don't even know how this conversation kind of came about, but I remember at one point my mom asked me when, she found out we were pregnant, she said, like, are you gonna be pregnant with her? And I was like, yeah, of course. And to me and my mom, what that means is like, are you going to, not, so my mom like did all the things, didn't take ibuprofen, stopped drinking coffee, all the things. And
Mhm.
so I think we must have had that conversation at some point. So when she asked, I was like, yeah, like not planning on drinking, not planning on drinking coffee. If she has to, I think we weaned off and then came back to tea or something. Like I did that with her.
Mhm.
Whatever drugs she wouldn't take, I wouldn't take. And I recognize there are things that couldn't be replicated. And I didn't have the word emotional labor for it, but I think this is what it was I wanted to, a couple things that were interesting to me was that, like, I haven't changed clothing sizes since I was like 18. So it's been like 15 years of the same clothing size. And there's a lot of moments where, I have things that fit me really nicely. And I had this epiphany like, wow, Alyssa doesn't get to wear the thing that she loves wearing. Even now, like the baby weight has persisted, and she gets new clothes often, and I recognize, wow, like it's really privileged to have the same size body for 15 years. I can wear the same stuff that I was wearing in senior year of high school, that she doesn't have, so that I could, so that I could be a parent. So like I did a little series, and a lot of people didn't like it. I think I got a lot of pushback. It'll be interesting how I go about it once, when we're pregnant again. But um, I did a little series on like all the things you can attempt doing. Some people said like, yeah, you're method acting, and it's like bullshit, and you're taking the sanctity or taking the sacredness out of pregnancy. And I'm like, I don't know,
Mm.
is that really sacred that you can't sleep on your stomach anymore when you're pregnant? And I think there are a handful of people that just thought it was stupid what I was doing, and I don't care. But so to answer your question, yeah, I wore a weight vest. It was during summer in Boston, throughout the summer when she had put on the weight. Alyssa had called me out at one point because I had a little fanny pack with a 5 pound weight in it. And I went to a doctor's appointment with it. My doctor was like, "Oh yeah, you're so cool for that." And she's like, "Are you just doing that so like you can stroke your ego about it, like so that people can be like, oh, look at this awesome husband doing this cool thing." I mean, even, when you're saying that, like, there's a part of me that is looking forward to saying, yeah, I'm an awesome guy for this. Um, but I think what I didn't have the words for was I think I was trying to do some of the emotional labor that she was doing so that I could appreciate more of her experience. I know that I'm not going to replicate it, but
Mhm.
like, I'm a pretty tall guy, and when I was a teacher, I was in a trauma-informed school. There are like 30 kids. They're all girls in a school that stayed there. And like if the kids were like running or acting like they would get in fights, like you had to restrain people. And I remember this one time I had my fanny pack on. They didn't know why I had it. I had been hiding it from them, sort of. They didn't know there's a 5 pound weight in there. They thought, um, and I remember running, like sprinting up some stairs, like three at a time, and whacking myself in the crotch from the fanny pack, and you know, kind of knocks the wind out of you. I'm like, wow, this is something that Alyssa cannot do. She can't sprint upstairs. She has a human inside of her. I remember there was a moment of like I felt so uncomfortable because it was sweating and it was hot. And I had the weight vest on under a sweatshirt. And I was like, I should just take this off. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna sit with the pain of it because Alyssa doesn't have the luxury of temperature regulation. And so I think there were a handful of
Mm.
purposeful hurdles that I put out for myself so that I could try to experience some of what she was going through and the lack of control and just being able to acknowledge my own privilege. I remember, sometimes she got annoyed with me about it, is I wore the fanny pack to bed one night, and she's like, wait, she went to like cuddle me and felt it on my hip, and she's like, "You still wearing that thing?" I was like, "Yeah, I just, take that thing off. Like, this is not fun not being able to sleep. This is not a game." Um, and so like there were definitely moments where I think I probably went a little too far and like she got annoyed by it. Um, so I think there was a significant amount of learning that it's hard to necessarily articulate, but I think it was a moment of trying to get more of her experience from a invisible level that you can kind of
Mm.
only experience if you have some of the physical challenges that they're going through.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think you're kinda highlighting what is so challenging about these conversations between couples, and helping to be able to relate to the different loads that each person is carrying, like the emotional weight with caregiving tasks. And I know from listening to moms, that is one of the most challenging things is to communicate to your partner what you're experiencing there. And so what you did is definitely sounds like an effective way for fathers or men to be able to understand or relate a little bit better. But yeah, how else do you go about that talking to couples about, how they evaluate that emotional psychological component when their experiences are completely different?
I think so how do you have a conversation with a couple that's trying to see eye to eye that is not, if one of them is looking at a whiteboard on the part that you write on, the other one's looking at the side, like, what do you mean write on the whiteboard? This thin little, wooden line, like if they're having two different totally experiences, I think because I understand my own experience, uh, I think a lot of the times we're trying to get guys to see the women where they're at. Um, and they're like, what do you mean? It's just easy to do these things. Or, even I try to acknowledge my privilege when I saw, Catherine Reitman, the writer producer for Working Moms. I thought that was a really great series to watch as Alyssa was
Mhm.
pregnant. Um, she talked about, she had a post the other day about like being in a network setting where, when guys are talking with each other, they kind of see each other as competition, but like trying to help each other out. But when women step in the room, it's held against them and they're like, the men are assessing whether they're a threat. And so half those networking sessions, instead of gaining the wisdom that I think a lot of guys enjoy, they're having to either prove that they belong there or they're having to like prove that they're not a threat to the men there, and
Mhm.
like acknowledging that that's like an advantage that I have stepping into network session, that I'm just thinking about myself. I'm not doing the emotional labor of trying to make sure that people have a certain perspective of me. I can bring things like that, and knowing what that woman experiences to pointing out things maybe a little differently to the guys. One of the pieces of advice they try to give, I think, for women that are doing the emotional labor, that are trying to find a new angle for explaining it to their partners, is trying to call out mental and emotional labor as their partner complains about it but doesn't have the language for it. So the example I always give is, if a guy comes home, he's like, "Oh man, like that guy Tom, he sucks." Like, "Oh, why does he suck?" "Oh, well, he's always asking me to remember like the time card punch out number." "God, man, just remember that, like just write it down somewhere, do something with it. Stop asking me." Wow, it sounds like you hold the mental load for him. And yeah, and you're probably gonna have to send him an email on Monday when he forgets to, right? Yeah, like I'm gonna have to do that too. Yeah, it's a lot of mental load, isn't it? It's like labeling it for them so that they can see
Mhm.
where they're doing the words. And like I gotta say, there are a couple moments in my mental load mastery program. So, it's a small, intimate group of guys that are all, they recognize that they need to improve, and most of them, their wives showed them my videos, and they're like, yeah, like I can kind of relate to you. It's like it's pretty cool seeing four guys using the language emotional labor and mental load and invisible labor and decision fatigue, and like just hearing a couple guys talking about emotional labor, like I've teared up
Mhm.
a couple times just watching them talk about the woman experience.
You're doing such a good job conveying that experience through just ways that really like land and resonate through all these wonderful examples and personal examples. And I think one thing I've loved that you've been able to articulate and add a language to is with the emotional and psychological load of parenting, the tasks that don't necessarily obviously carry a emotional component. I think you gave an example the other day. You were doing some sort of chore around the house. I think you were doing like yard work or um yeah, maybe it was like raking leaves or some sort of yard work, and you recognized that you'd spent maybe too much time doing this, or you were kind of using it as sort of a respite because Alyssa was involved in childcare at that moment, and it looked on paper like maybe you were like the one working really hard, but really she was responsible for like all the caregiving while you were doing those tasks. And that was to me kind of like, oh, whoa, that's actually, when it looks like my husband's done stuff around the house all day and I've just been hanging out with the kids.
Yeah, and I think that was actually an episode from I don't know if you're familiar with the Mom Room, Renee Rena, but she
Yeah.
had I think she coins it Pancake Gate, where she had this episode maybe a year and a half ago or something talking about how her partner would so she's a stay-at-home mom. She has her social media and her podcast, but her partner is a surgeon and comes home on Saturday morning and he jumps into making pancakes and going out to mow the lawn. And meanwhile, she's been indoors with their kid most of the week, especially I think it was during like COVID or something. And she was like, "Hey, like, can you not do pancakes? Like, I just want to sit and enjoy coffee with you." And like the internet exploded on her, being like, "Fuck you! Like, why would you tell him not to do? Just be thankful for like that he's doing it. Like, I wish I had a guy that would do that." And it's a moment of like, one, I think we're all entitled from our partners to at least be able to hear how they feel cared for. Um,
Hmm.
and furthermore, like there's a difference between doing something that looks good on paper versus what's actually filling your cup. And
Hmm.
I think it's really easy. You know, I an article was written. I use the word weaponized responsibility,
I was gonna
where
ask
it's
about that.
like
Yeah.
I've caught myself doing this a couple times in the past 2 years as I've been trying to understand my own behavior and be my own client sort of. But I've recognized there are a handful of times where like I'll go to do dishes and I know the cats need to be fed and the dog needs to be fed and our toddler's lunch needs to be made soon. And Alyssa will come down and be like, "Hey, did you feed the cats?" "No, I'm doing the dishes." But the dishes are mine. I fully own those in our house. So it's really I'm checking something off my own checkbox instead of the family's checkbox. And so there have been moments when I'm escaping a chore that um I don't want to do in that moment and is both of our responsibilities, or just hasn't been very well defined of whose specific responsibility is. And I'm checking something off my own checkbox, but not the family's combined checkbox. And so Alyssa becomes the default because of it.
Hmm. Yeah, that term. So the way that resonated with me when you'd posted about that was how weaponized responsibility can actually like also can be used as a way to kind of get out of or avoid tasks that are less appealing, and I see it show up in my own and other relationships a lot where there is maybe a caregiving piece of it that is like demanding full attention at that moment. Baby needs to eat, the 2-year-old screaming, we're trying to get out the door, and there's other tasks that the other person is focused on, that aren't necessarily directly involved in caregiving. So I feel like I see it show up a whole lot there. And then also kind of going back to like a lot of the default tasks that often fall on the mom that have to do with some of the direct caregiving, that weaponized responsibility is kind of an ability to stay away or not be as engaged in some of those tasks
Yeah.
because you
And
are,
it,
yeah,
yeah, and because they don't have the distinction, or there hasn't been that conversation about who owns what, is it's like, well, I can't be mad at him. He's doing something for the house or something for the family. I mean, even I think,
yeah,
in that conversation where it's like, hey, I got to get up, I got to get to work to pay the bills. Um,
yeah.
and at the same time, like I've, I think since I had, you know, one of the things I was really proud of when we started doing Fair Play and looking at our responsibilities is we acknowledged that I owned about 51% of waking up with our child, which I was really proud of. And for me to be able to say that I was waking up with our kid during the night 51 or more percent of the time, um, was me showing that like our family comes first, my job comes second. And even when I was on paternity, or when Alyssa was still on maternity leave, but I had just gone back to work, showing
Hmm.
that like, hey, her well-being while she's home with our 5 month old versus, me performing at 100% versus less than 100%, or, you know, 80 or 60%. Like both of us operating at 60% is obviously not great, but
Hmm.
like saying that me performing in my job at a higher percent than she's just performing as a parent at a lower percent, like identifying that the job doesn't have to take priority over like her well-being. I don't know if I even articulate what I was trying to say there, but I think you get it.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think also that something that brings up for me too is how I talked about the concept of help, and that helping, often we think of, if you're helping, it means you don't fully own the task. It means you're just kind of standing in, or you're. But I think you've done a good job of explaining how help can be also, like, you can be providing a task or some sort of, um, performing a responsibility that helps the other person find time for what they need to fill their cup, or the emotional labor dynamic can look like the other person helping in a way that allows the other person to, indirectly alleviate some of the emotional load. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think part of what you're referring to actually probably comes from the other creator, J.R. Minton. He was on like Good Morning America for it, and it's like that's probably more viral than anything I've made. It's got to be in like the 30 to 50 millions, because it was reposted. I think even just my duet of it has like 7 million or something. But he pretty much said, "I don't help my wife cook. I don't help her clean. I don't help her do the dishes because I, as a father." I cook, I clean, I do the dishes. I can't
Mhm,
help I can't help with something that's not, I can't help with, I don't know what he says from there, but pretty much pointing out that if you're using the word help, you're saying that the other person is the default holder of that responsibility. But if you are a parent, if you are an equal contributor, like you wouldn't say that a co-founder is helping you with the business. They're just doing the business. So
mhm,
similarly, if we look at it as co-founder versus like boss and employee, yeah, an employee helps their boss, but a co-founder doesn't help their other co-founder. And
mhm.
that's the language that we really try to stray from, is using the word help. I went to duet a video the other day, and he called me out on it in a really respectful way. He's like, "Hey man, I think he ended up duetting, or he ended up stitching the same video, calling out the fact that the guy said he started off with like, I'm going to say something that, might be controversial to some, but I think men should help around the house more." And at first
Mm.
I was like, yeah, he's not saying that he's helping her. He's saying he's helping the house. And then I realized, wait a second, you still wouldn't use the word help if you were like a true partner, if you were an equitable partner. So whenever we use the word help, that immediately creates the dynamic where the helper is like lesser held responsible for, and the helpee is the person that owns, is the project manager, is the owner of the task and the responsibility.
I think that part of that concept, that in my mind, that also sort of relayed this untrue equitability, or at least in early parenthood, where there's certain things that, as you pointed out with some of Alyssa's experiences, just aren't something you're going to, like, fully be able to experience the weight of that responsibility in the same way. So when we say it's not helping, in some way, to me, that almost kind of undermined that. I can't think of the post exactly, but I remember in Mom Room, she had this conversation, Renee, had this conversation with Matthew McConaughey about how, while his wife was, Camilla was pregnant, he said something like, "I need to find a way to help you take a break, help you, put your feet up." And so, again, kind of this concept where you've looked at helping can be to accommodate the other person to meet a need. And I think that's something that, yeah, I feel like kind of shows up in your messaging too.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I vaguely remember what you're talking about there. And I think one of the things, pretty interesting, um, pivot that happened in our relationship was about this time last year when I started taking, content creation a little bit more seriously. It was like when I just become a fair play facilitator, and some of the other, therapists and coaches and stuff were like, "Zach, how big's your email list?" And I was like, what do you mean? What's an email list? And they're like, "Yeah, you have a following, but you don't have emails." Either way, I ended up starting putting out like a freebie, and building my email list. And we're like, okay, maybe I should take this seriously as like a significant source of income, like something that I'll eventually I'd gone into sales because I wanted to have it be more than just like a hobby on the side. And when at that same time, for Christmas last year, I know that this sounds disjointed. It'll come together in a second. Um, Alyssa, we just moved and I had bought her like a 10 pack of riding lessons for a local place that had horses. And she grew up with the horses. She was a rider for like during her college career, but it's been like 8 or 9 years, I think, since she was on a horse. And when I gave her the permission financially and like, time wise to go do something that she really enjoyed that had really nothing to do with the rest of us, all of a sudden I felt like I had permission to take this seriously and like say, hey, Alyssa, I would like to go make a video in the other room for, half an hour. Does that work for you? Because I was at the same time giving her the space to have 3 hours to go be with horses on, I think, like probably 2 or 3 Sundays on that first month. So I think when so many of us don't realize how much permission we feel like we don't have for the things that we want to do. And when
Mhm.
we start granting that to our partner, we also start feeling maybe not entitled, but like a little bit less guilty around being able to create some boundaries around the time that we have for, in fair play, it's called the unicorn space. So
Mhm.
when Alyssa was starting to have some time boundaries for her unicorn space, I started feeling like I could have some for mine too.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's one thing too that is so tied into mental health that we sort of overlook in parenthood, especially in early parenthood. And you have this entire identity shift as you become a parent. Your entire social context and identity and like every realm of your life has changed. And so having that unicorn space, having that space for pursuing things that help you feel like your true self or feel like you're important and has huge implications for mental health. But I wanted to circle back on one thing that is such a barrier in sort of all of these conversations and communication between couples is often the defensiveness that creeps in. And would love to hear a little bit more about your sort of approach to defensiveness because I know that you have some kind of practical strategies around how to notice when you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm gonna give away pretty much my whole mental and mastery program for free right now, because you don't need me to do it. It's the question of if you want accountability. Like I'm there to help you stay accountable, and like have someone there for emotional support as the guys are going through it, which I think a lot of need. But in a lot of ways, you don't need it. The the prescription that I give to the guys that are coming to me, this is like the typical, on my first call with folks, this is like the general situation that I'm outlining that all of them are nodding their heads like, oh my God, my life. Is I'm gonna say mom and dad for the two sort of personas. Um, Mom is fed up. She's kind of sick of him doing a 80% job on doing the dishes. Finally, one night, he doesn't wipe something, and she's like, "Dear God, like, how many times do I got to tell you? Like, can you please finish the job? Like, can you please do the thing?" He gets defensive because he's not ready for it in that moment, and then he's like hit by fear, and it's an uncomfortable situation. He's also defensive, so nothing gets repaired in the moment. But then for the next 3 weeks, he's on top of his shit. He's crushing it. He's going 110% from normal. And then the fear wears off. And then, the next week he starts coasting again, going back to his 90%, then 85 and 80%. Um, and he's like, oh, everything's good. All right, I'm going to kind of go back to my status quo, because the fear is now worn off. And then we repeat the cycle. And what I think a lot of couples are really struggling with is having the conversation around, in fair play, it's called MSC, minimum standard of care. And what
Mhm.
that looks like is having a meeting where you're saying, okay, let's go into the kitchen. Let's look at what the dishes look like. Let's look at what a finished job looks like that we can both agree on. One of us might have a higher standard, one might have a lower standard. Let's find somewhere to meet in the middle. let's find somewhere or not meet in the middle. Like, how about you just come to my level? I think ideally, I think a lot of guys have lower standards, is what I'm seeing and what I've experienced myself. I think a lot of times when I meet Alyssa's standard for a while, I start saying, is this part really necessary? Like, I'm doing it because we agreed on it, but like it sucks. I hate it. And it's like the last 2% of the job that it's more time consuming than I think it's worth. And I think
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, like if you're having iterative conversations, like, this week I feel like I did a, 80 to, I did 100%, maybe 98% job. Did you notice the 2% was gone? I know we had created that in our original conversation, but is that an issue for you? So rather than having these exploding conversations that are really just a broken set of standards that one person created that the other person is not fulfilling on, I'm holding guys accountable to having a weekly meeting with their partner where they're talking about the schedule, they're talking about expectations for the week. Ideally, as they go along and where we read through the Fair Play book, and I have a set of reflection questions that kind of cater the book more to men because
Mm-hmm.
it's really easy to read that book and get really fucking offensive. So as we're reading through the book, I'm having them have reflections on it, like listen to try to try to give them the safe space to battle with those ideas. I think, battling with those ideas with your partner, not the greatest environment to talk those ones out, but I'm here to be like your covering man child buddy that like hears you because of lives it. And at the same time, like I'm going to hold you accountable to the guy that you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're going through that, we're starting to implement the fair play method somewhere down the line. And a huge part of what I'm helping people reframe is CPE, conception, planning, and execution. So instead of having it be disjointed, let's take groceries and shopping for a second. Instead of having her do the meal planning and then do the grocery shopping, and then he picks up the groceries, puts them away, and does the cooking. Um, Ideally, that's one person owns all of that. Instead of having one person do, the management of the laundry, they put it into the washer, and then once it's done with the washer, it's the other person's responsibility. Don't split that up. Have that be one person. Have one person own all conception, planning, and execution. And in the book, she talks about some of the different traps that you stop falling into when you embrace that way of doing things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of the fights that we get into are poor handoffs of like, there have been couples that have there's a couple I worked with here and there. It was one guy I was working with and his wife would jump on sometimes and they'd point out like, yeah, I wanted to do this thing. So, I did 50% of the work and then I said, here, you do the rest. And because he's not seeing the original conception of it, he doesn't have the same image that you have in your head. And so he's rarely going to hit the bar the way you want to. And when he doesn't, you're going to get pissed at him. And then along with that, he's going to ask 21 questions before he does anything because he doesn't want to get yelled at. So if
Mm-hmm.
we have those conversations on a weekly basis where we're identifying the minimum standard of care for things, identifying what the expectations we have for each other are, one, we're just having healthier conversations. They're not as emotional. And we're also coming to that talk emotionally prepared to deal with those, just like I think
Mm-hmm.
couples counseling. But
Yeah.
also, I think we're resetting the way that we're able to talk to each other. And we start realizing that it's a little bit safer than we had realized for talking about tough stuff. And I think a lot of value that I think I bring to the guys is like I'm calling them out if they're not having those tough conversations. And we're trying to get down to in our group sessions, like what is the hard thing that you're really avoiding here? What's the discomfort that you're feeling? Where is it in your body? Well, let's feel it out. Um, and having them identify that so we can be like, okay, well, there's your number one homework assignment is to talk about that thing and to express and share that you've been feeling shameful about that. Because I think it's us getting more comfortable with hard conversations is like the muscle that needs to be built.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of guys to open up about those things, I think similar to a business meeting, I think when we start, you know, we call them the boring meeting at our house and in the program because Alyssa finds them endlessly boring. But they're just like those meetings that I think corporations have because corporations say like, hey, for us to be efficient about this process, we should probably meet on it every week and like have a status update and talk about these things. Because if we don't have a standard operating procedure, you know, it's just not going to work out well. And we've seen this with other companies. And so that's why we have all these what feel like really boring meetings in corporate settings. But it's because money's on the line that they're like, we should talk about this for 30 minutes every week. And
Mhm.
similarly, because we live in a capitalist society, because it doesn't seem like there's money on the line for a lot of things, we aren't seeing the value in having those conversations in a structured and planned way. And so all the time I'm saying, like, a guy will be talking about, yeah, I have a really hard time planning out X, Y, and Z. And be like, what's your job again? Oh, I'm a project manager. Okay. What skills do you use in your career that you can implement here? Maybe minus the software. Um, and so like then they end up like planning an agenda just like they would with their team and taking those very corporatified capitalistic skills and applying them into a domestic setting because when we start saying like, hey, like domestic labor is serious and it's real and it's hard and it takes a lot of effort, like let's use business type processes to deal with those things. It seems to
Mhm.
work a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I love how you pointed out with different expectations and standards, such a point of contention that there's a right way to do something, and um, that someone's not doing a task the way you would be doing it.
Yeah, I'm gonna add one more thing is I think a lot of times when in that like reoccurring cycle I had described, I think a lot of times the mom is getting into the shouting match. She's feeling like she needs to add extra layers of emotion to really get it through his thick skull, right? And not only does that just create like a fear mindset, like would you rather be loved or feared? So you're just creating fear, and so it doesn't stick. But furthermore, she isn't feeling like she needs to add that level of emotion if she knows there's going to be another conversation. Because a lot of times things I think are being said like, God, if I don't say it like this, it's not going to get through. But if you have these weekly cadences and you say, hey, historically, she's done the dishes. Let's have him take it over. And
Mhm.
let's not have one conversation about it. Let's have four. And then she doesn't feel like she needs to layer on the emotion and he can hear it a lot better. And then week two, he can, for me, it was I took over the home security system and I gave myself permission to fail. The first week, I was like, Zach, you're probably gonna remember 4 out of the 7 days. Let's just make sure that we identify why we might have missed the three. I ended up
Mhm.
coming back and I'd done 6 out of 7 days and recognized the last one that I missed because there was a box in front of it. And so I said, if this is going to work, we need to make sure boxes are not ending up in front of this little tablet in our kitchen because I'm going to forget. And then I'm also going to try to habit stack. So when I go to finish doing the dishwasher, it's 12 inches from the tablet thing and I can go check the locks and I'll go do that. So having iterative conversations rather than like end all be all come to Jesus rally cries
Yeah.
just work way better. And there's a lot less significance, a lot less shame built into those conversations.
Yes. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Taking a step back to kind of again how this all relates to maternal mental health. One of the big things I know Eve Rodsky points out in the book that these issues relate directly to mental and physical health, and I think she gives us a statistic where there's like a cohort of 200 some women, and for those that identify that they're responsible for at least two-thirds of the invisible mental and domestic load, followed up with those women, and 2 years later or something, those who fit that category of two-thirds responsibility, all of them were being treated for some sort of mental health condition, and so has huge mental health implications. And that's why, again, when we're talking to moms who are dealing with this and recognizing that this dynamic in their relationship is a significant part of their mental health, you're an anecdote. And so turning people towards you as part of that solution um, is a real intervention. And so If you don't mind, would you give like a little bit more of an overview of the format of the mental load mastery program of like what that looks like for partners so we
Sure.
have some familiarity?
Yeah, it's a 13-week program, 10
Okay.
sessions. In the 3 weeks that skip, I have a one-on-one call with the guy, and I try to have at least one of those three also with the partner, especially towards the end, one to better understand how they're implementing it, and to help along the way with the implementation of the process. Because I think women can also get in their own way of like implementing that because I know Alyssa has been struggling as she's been reading through the book. She's not done yet. Um, like letting go of control of some things that she's been having an existential crisis of like, well, if I'm not, managing the laundry, that means I'm giving up by giving it to him. And then who am I if I'm not doing laundry? That's I I can't speak to that one as well as she can, but um so yeah, 10 group sessions. It's a pretty small, intimate group. Like smallest has been three, largest has been seven. With the three individual calls, you're part of a community of the other 30 to 40 guys that have already gone through the program. And on a weekly basis, I'm holding the men accountable to running that meeting, running that boring meeting. They're showing up with an agenda. I know that a lot of pushback has been caused because the women are like, why do I have to show up to this meeting every week and like just run one more thing to my mental load? And the whole purpose is for me to get these guys used to running the show on something, holding the mental load. They at the end of the group sessions, they're saying their minimum 4 bullet points. And like if they're saying, I want to talk about meal planning. Okay, hey man, what does it sound like you bring that up real time in the agenda? It sounds like me saying, well, what do we want? What do we want to have for dinner this week? And I'd be like, you recognize that's adding all the mental load right there, right? So let's reformulate how we're going to present that. What's another way we could do it? And then, the first
Mhm.
2 weeks I'll give it to them, but by the third week, I'm saying to them, you know what I'm going to say? What am I going to say? And then they're like, fuck, all right, yeah, I need to create a meal plan and present that to them and say, what are your issues with it rather than what do you want? So really retraining them to come prepared with lists, come prepared with thinking done and presented, rather than asking for the list and asking for, her thoughts and opinions on things. Um, an example, I got permission from this guy is that, they have a kid that's going to be doing soccer in the spring now. And one of the things he added to his list was like checking to make sure the cleats and the shin guards still fit. And I said, yeah, how are you going to present that? He's like, just like I said, like let's check to see how about, and I said, how about you come to the meeting telling her whether they fit or not? Like bring your kid, put the shin guards on, see if they fit, and present that to her and say, hey, we should factor in a budget for, we're gonna need some new soccer stuff or not. Um, so that's a lot of like the hands-on, like kind of nitty-gritty stuff that we're doing. Um, and yeah, I mean, there have been some guys that I've added the one-on-one calls as well as the partner call because I think a handful of the women have been like, yeah, I don't really know what you guys do in there. Some couples are seeing amazing results. They're doing the hard work. They're having the really tough conversations. Um, and I'm trying to figure out how to get better at holding them accountable to having those really challenging, uncomfortable conversations. And so I'm trying to loop in the partners and for one thing I just added the other day is that like I have to have the email address and or phone number of the wife as well, so that I can send out an email at the end of the sessions and say, this is what we talked about. Here's a discussion topic if you'd like to, talk with them about it. 'Cause sometimes they don't relay that as well. So I'm trying to do
Mhm.
some of the mental and emotional labor for the families so that the women can feel like they're a part of the conversation as well.
That's so cool, and thank you for explaining that. I think one thing too that comes to mind there is that you've done such a great job of not making this about anyone's fault, that, like, the partner isn't the problem, that there's a lot of underlying social and cultural, um, context and influences that really shape how we look at this, distribution of these different responsibilities, and so I love how you do that with, both kind of a self-deprecating way, like pointing out where thinking might be flawed, but at the same time that it's not like a core identity issue.
Yeah, it's okay to
Uh,
feel guilt around these things, but I think it's really ideal to chip away any shame that there might be around it because it doesn't really serve anyone. And shame is like that. It's like, for lack of a better way to describe it, it's like the Illuminati just kind of running the show behind the scenes. We have no idea what it's doing or how it's doing it. I don't know if the Illuminati is real, but so like shame is just like in the shadow character that's like running things and pulling strings, and we don't know what it's doing until we start talking about it. So if we can get into guilt mode over shame mode, that's I think that's huge. One of the goals that I have with them.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we know that, I mean, parenthood carries a lot of guilt for all. So we talk a lot about that with mom guilt and um, on the other side too in these relationships, and that it's not, yeah, it doesn't serve anything very constructive, um, for sure. Nor nor is it inspirational to ever get someone to guilt someone into action. I think before we wrap up, like I pointed out before, there isn't, formal training around a lot of these topics right now, or at least not yet. And so you're someone who really is an expert and kind of a leading voice in this area. And so we're turning people towards your social media pages. You have this formal program that people can sign up for. How else can people find you? Like any other avenues that you'd like to highlight?
I mean, if people want to get, what I can give you is the link for sort of, I can give them access to my Fair Play Mental Load 101 document, where they can also book a call with me if they'd like to. But
Cool.
the Mental Load 101 document is like 170 of my videos kind of condensed into one document. I know people tend to get to my account. Yes, it's entertaining, but there's a lot to consume there. I make a video every single day, sometimes two or three. So I think if you want to better understand mental load in a like me kind of breaking it down into just a couple examples and like showing like what the commonalities are of it, as well as the second half of it is talking about how to have that conversation
Mhm.
for a lot of women that are probably, I'm imagining mostly women listening to this podcast. If you're trying to have that conversation with your partner, not really sure where to start, you're walking on eggshells and you need a little bit of help having that initial conversation, have like some conversation starting philosophies to kind of give you there. So yeah, I'll give you that link. You can put it in the show notes. But Real Zach Fincher on Instagram. Uh, if you search Recovering Man Child, it's pretty easy to find me. Uh, I've been discovering if you just search mental load, it's also pretty easy to find me.
Awesome. Thank you. And then podcast, tell me about that because
Yeah,
or can we
it's
talk?
it's not much, I think. So like, I referenced boring meetings. One of the things I'm trying to do more of is recording Alyssa and I having our boring meetings so people can get
Cool.
a taste of kind of what that looks like. We do have one of those done. We had one the other day that ended up going 2.5 hours that got a little personal. I don't know if we'll actually end up posting it or not. Feel it might be a little too vulnerable for us, but yeah, I think a lot of people found value in hearing me in 90-second clips. And my friend Frank is my one of my favorite cheerleaders. He said, like, dude, I get to hang out with you so much, and like you're just so much more than these 90-second clips. Like people need like longer form versions of you and to hear like the full depth of like what you're talking about. So yeah, I do solo episodes sometimes. I'm trying to have a handful of guests on. I actually am going to be speaking with Eve in a couple weeks, the Fair Play author. So, and I had a really good one the other day with mom Renee from the Mom Room. Uh,
Yes.
one of my friends that I haven't met her in person yet, but I will soon. I can see her face blank on her name. Paige, she's a Paige Turner is her account. But
Okay.
Paige Connell, she talks a lot about mental load a lot. I know that she has a lot of man haters because she tells it like it is. But yeah, I'm trying to have guests on here and there, but hard part staying consistent with the podcast. I'm so much better at the 90-second videos that take me like 7 minutes to make. But yeah, so if people want to see what a boring meeting looks like, we'll happily deliver a very boring meeting.
Awesome. No, we'll definitely include that in the show notes. And yeah, would be surprised if they really are that boring because everything you put out there is so dynamic and interesting and digestible. Are you working on a book too, or is this something I got from? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I put in another 3 hours Friday morning, woke up at before the crack of dawn to get back at it because I've been sitting on it for months and I have a couple meetings coming up with agents and I don't want to have nothing there. So I'm trying to hold myself accountable. But I would say the book is it's mixed between like Fair Play and Justin Baldoni's Man Enough. If they
Mm,
had a love child. So it's kind of touching on all these examples of like kind of how I got to where I am. Giving a ton of examples where I have and continue to mess up and have Alyssa holding the mental load in her home and the emotional labor, but also trying to share a path forward, how we go about that, and probably including anecdotes from some of the guys that I've worked with as well.
very cool. Well, before we wrap up, we have two questions that we ask all parents that come on the pod,
Mhm.
and the first one is, I didn't expect parenthood to be so blank.
Wow, first, I've been trying to do first thought, best thought, because I think it's like your subconscious, and then it's like I'm ashamed to say this word, but and a lot of times it's boring. Um, I think there's a lot of moments. I saw a really good clip the other day of like, man, it all flashes for before your eyes. And then there's like this clip of this guy just watching his toddler take 7 minutes to put his shoes on. And I think that there's a lot of like, yeah, I really try to soak it in and I try to be kind to myself when I'm finding myself kind of bored and like kind of like yeah, she's having fun in the tub. I really soaked in the first 7 minutes and we're trailing on 8, 9, 10. And I'm like, there's only so much more of like dinosaur on like say just repeating themselves over and over again. So
Yeah, that's a good one. I can totally relate to that. We haven't gotten that response yet, but I imagine that most parents absolutely feel that way and are hesitant to admit it. A lot of redundancy. Okay, the second one is I wish every new parent knew about blank.
I wish they knew the heaviness of the shame that they could feel around the parent that they want to be versus the parent that they're seeing themselves end up showing up as. And that the best antidote for that is being kind to yourself and knowing that you're human, even though you're a parent.
I love that. Yeah, that hits home for sure. And I think a challenging aspect of that is that as you become that parent you really want to be, you never get back those moments that you weren't that at that stage in your child's life. So, yeah, definitely requires a lot of grace and acceptance for sure. Well, thank you so much. So appreciate you coming on today, sharing everything that you did. And yeah, we'll look forward to the book, to podcast episodes, and everything else you can continue to put out there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you. And I'm still battling with the word expert, so I'm honored that you guys as trained clinicians are seeing that I'm bringing enough value to worth calling me an expert. Thank you.